Hey friends, the Exiles in Babylon conference is just a few weeks away, April 18th through the 20th here in Boise, Idaho. Space is filling up really fast. It's going to sell out. So if you want to attend, I would sign up like today if you're going to attend live. If you can't attend live, there's also the virtual option. All the information is at theologyintheraw.com. We're tackling a ton of really important topics. The theology and politics of Israel-Palestine. We're talking about women power and abuse in the church, LGBTQ people in the church. We're talking about deconstruction in the gospel. We're also talking about politics and lots of interesting things going on at the conference. Again, theologyintheraw.com. Register now if you want to attend live, or really anytime if you want to attend virtually. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. My guest today is Brent Phillips, who leads Cherish Uganda with his wife, Leah. Cherish was formerly an orphanage and now functions as a spiritual formation community center using medical education and family strengthening to reach the community that they serve. And if you remember from a couple weeks ago, I had Brandon Stiver on the podcast to talk about the difference between orphanage-based orphan care versus family care, caring both for orphans and their families. And he said that Brent over at Cherish Uganda has done a fantastic job making that transition. And so I've been talking with Brent, learning about his ministry at Cherish Uganda, and just am really impressed with it. Because I know look, we all know it, right? I mean, there's a lot of ministries or, things that white Westerners can do in Africa that are maybe well-intended, but can actually produce long-term harm in the community and in the ministry work that they're striving to do. But there's people that are doing it well, who have learned from learned from making mistakes, learning how to do things well, that are actually bringing a positive effect on the communities that they seek to serve. And Cherish Uganda is among the best ministries I've seen that are doing this. So I'm actually going out to visit. I'm bringing a team. My wife and I are bringing a team out to visit Cherish Uganda, not to go tell them how to do ministry, but to go to learn, to serve alongside the people there. And I'm excited to visit Cherish Uganda among several other ministries that we'll see in Kenya and Uganda. So I'm excited for you to get to know Brent. He's just done an amazing job doing ministry in Africa. So please welcome to the show for the first time, the one and only Brent Phillips. All right. Hey, Brent, welcome to Theology in the Raw for the first time. I'm really excited about this conversation. Yeah. So just to set the context, I mean, we just chatted a couple days ago because my wife and I were bringing some people over to Africa to visit several ministries, one of which is Cherish Uganda, which you helped. Did you help start it, right? It wasn't already in existence.
Yeah. No. Actually, there was a group of a church network out of the UK that started it. And so we joined at about the 3-year mark.
Okay. Can you take us back to when you moved to Uganda? And then I would love to hear how, I know you've kind of have rethought some ministry questions. Like, what does it mean to be a Westerner doing ministry in Africa? And I know you've had kind of a shift in thinking along many lines, along the lines of many different aspects of what that looks like. So yeah, take us back to when you arrived in Uganda.
Yeah, I came right out of school and started on staff at churches. I was, over the course of 25 years before we moved to Africa, on staff at 3 different churches, and it was local church ministry, pastoral care, children's ministry, and then lead pastor, and that was just the path that we thought we'd be on forever. And then we had sent a family to Uganda as missionaries from our church, and so we kind of did that whole thing, sent them out there. And after about 6 months, they called and they're like, this place is crazy hard. They went there with kids, their whole family. And so my wife and 2 other gals hopped on a plane and went out there and just spent 10 days with them, just encouraging them and praying with them and seeing their life and getting a picture of what does it look like there for you. And then they had heard about this little HIV orphanage out near Entebbe. And so they thought, on the way to the airport, let's just stop by and see that place. So they did. They got a 45-minute tour with the gal who was running it, and hopped on the plane and got home. And my wife could not stop talking about this little place. And they saw so many ministries while they were there, but this little place just kind of grabbed her heart, and the Spirit did something. And so we thought, well, let's press into that. So we started pressing into that relationship, started, giving money and pray, or kind of the typical things churches do. one thing led to the next, and we started to realize, I think we should be there. And so it was January of 2010 when she went. It was by Father's Day of 2010, we decided God wants us there. And then by November of 2010, we had transitioned the church, sold everything, hopped on a plane, and ended up in Uganda. So not part of the plan, didn't do any sort of like, missionary training, like just nothing. Like we raised all the money we needed in 6 weeks. And it was just this kind of lightning, which is typically the way God works in our life. I met my wife, Leah, and I, we've been married 32 years. I met her 6 weeks later. We were engaged. 7 months later, we were married. And that's kind of how our life has been. So we end up in Uganda, not really knowing a whole lot. But one thing that someone told us that we took to heart was show up there as a student. Don't think you have anything to bring to that place. If God's going to drop you there, let him tell you what you have once you're there and coming from a place of a student. And so we did that. In fact, we remember the first Sunday we were there, we'd gone to a local church and we drove into Kampala and we had lunch at a pizza place of all things. And there was a group of women sitting at the table next to us and they were also missionaries. And somehow we strike up this conversation. They find out we just showed up and they said, hey, just remember, whatever you think is going to happen here, like it's not. just wipe that clean and just realize it's not going to be what you think it is and just hold on for the ride. And so that's really kind of the way we stepped in, thankfully, and just started to realize very quickly that this kind of ministry mindset that we had invested 25 years in, like there was no going to be this replication of, oh, this all worked here, just drop it over. And I knew that wouldn't really work. But then once you get there and you realize, oh yeah, it really won't work. Like this is a whole new thing. So yeah, that's how we showed up. And we didn't have a job description. We didn't have a paycheck. We had raised our own money. We didn't know what we were going to do. Cherish didn't know what we were going to do. It was just, hey, we feel like this is what the Spirit is doing, and we went. So, as people look at that, like you guys are idiots. And there's a fine line between faith and stupidity. So hopefully we are on the right side of that line. So that's how we showed up.
Is that unique to Uganda or this ministry, that the thought that you have all these ideas of what you're going to do and you just need to table all those thoughts, or is that, do you find that pretty common among most people that go overseas?
I think it's pretty common. I think there's definitely some good training and good stuff that can happen beforehand that can help with that, where we just kind of like, hit us like a truck because we didn't properly do, looking back, we wish we had done a lot more of that coming in. But I think it's very common. Part of it, you just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Tell us about what Cherish Uganda was when you got there, specifically, and then take us through your journey. What is it now, and why the change in philosophy of ministry?
Yeah, it was an orphanage for kids with HIV. So there was a big issue happening in the country where, and there's still some of it for sure happening, but this idea of HIV meant death sentence, carries all kinds of stigma, lots of myths and lies associated with it. And so families weren't really knowing what to do, were fearful, were dropping kids off at hospitals and bolting, leaving kids along the side of the road, hoping somebody finds them. And so what made sense to us at the time was, why don't we gather all these kids together? Let's put them in a place that's safe, a place where we can feed them, we can educate them, we can take care of their medical needs. This is the best path forward. And so that's what we did, which is what orphanages all around the world have done. And so once you get into that path and you start getting better and better and better at that, it's like, yeah, this is great. This is great. Add more kids, more staff, and the thing starts to grow. Well, then you start to ask yourself some questions. Like, first of all, how come there's really not orphanages in the West? Like, there was some reason why that used to work in places like America and Europe, but now it doesn't. And then what about these kids once they, you have this kind of ideal, like, these are our kids, these are cherished kids, and we will always be family.
Mm-hmm.
But then all of a sudden we had kids that started to start to age out, and you've educated them and you've done the best training you can. And then they walk through those gates out into that world. And we can say we're a family, but we're still an institution. We can call those women moms and aunties, but they're not. Those were women who were paid to take care of me. Now, they were loving and kind and great women, but every child knows that that's not my mom. Somewhere out there is my mom or family that didn't want me. And now how do I now step into what it feels like everybody else has this family structure and I don't? So those are the kinds of questions we started wrestling with, and started to watch failures, like kids that they're living what we would assume for years in our care with this relationship with God that seems great, and they're taking their medication and they're treating each other kind and they're doing all the things all the boxes you're checking. Like, yeah, this is what we want. But then they step out into the world and it doesn't continue. Now, not for all of them, but for many, many. And so then you start looking at the research and you start doing your homework and realizing institutionalized care is not a good thing. Like that, it's just not good for kids. It's not good for attachment and development and relationships and emotional growth. I mean, it is vast, the data that speaks to the problem of children growing up in an institution, no matter how good the institution is, versus a family. And so that's when we started to realize we got to find family. So we started digging into records that the original team had started with good files, and we call it family tracing. It's like, okay, here's this kid. What information do we know? Now let's go figure out if we can find an aunt, an uncle, a grandmother, a mother, somebody that's related to this kid. And what's crazy is we actually resettled about 125 children into family. Most of them into some sort of kinship care, some sort of blood relative. There was 6 we did not. There was 6 we did adopt out. And then we had 6 in foster care that we couldn't find anybody for as well. So basically 12 kids out of 120, 10% we could not find a home for. But as far as blood relative, but 90% had a family member that we found. And this is a course of 2 years. This was maybe longer to really walk through the process. And probably longer if you look at from when we started with the first child to the last one. Like, it's multiple years. It's not a quick, like, oh, hey, guess what? We found your aunt. Meet this guy. He's your nephew. And here you go. We'll share a meal together and we'll see you later. Like, it's a long process and a long journey to reunite kids that somehow ended up separated from family.
Because I could imagine, and tell me if this is just not true. It sounds like it might not be true. I can imagine that, the kid's been in an orphanage. He's got friends. He has relationships. He has people loving on him. And then he has some distant relative that shows up one day and like, all right, this is your new home. Right. And what if that distant relative is an alcoholic or neglects them, or just because they're a blood relative doesn't mean they're going to be caring for them well. So tell us about that, like, assumption that, it is being raised in the house of a blood relative, usually, always, sometimes better than their life in an orphanage.
Yeah, it depends. Generally, it is. What we found was we started doing what we called family days. So once we found family, we'd have these family days where family would come and visit. We'd make the introductions on the Cherish grounds, meals and playing games and dancing and just having an afternoon together. And so these family days would start to happen. And what was remarkable was the ones, and we didn't obviously find all the families, and then we started family days. We started family days, so there were some kids we had family members for and some we did not. Their family weren't there. And to watch the response of those kids whose family member did not show up, heartbreaking. Just tear your heart out, because they're like, wait, they have somebody who's come to see them, but not me. I mean, you just watch that. And then there was lots of steps, but a step further down the road was we'd go visit where that aunt lives. And then we start to build that relationship. And then it eventually gets to the point where that child will stay the night, the weekend with that, and it's just kind of this transition. And you would go to some of these homes that are dirt floors, no running water, no electricity, far out, deep village. And then at Cherish, you're getting 3 square meals a day. You're getting, we got playgrounds, like you're getting all the stuff.
Yeah.
But when these kids were going away and spending time with families and these other ones were not, they were again devastated. Like they would rather be with family in what you would look at as a condition like this is not such a good living condition. They would rather choose that than be at the place where all the comforts are.
Wow.
So even as an 8-year-old, they could differentiate, oh, that's my family and those people want me. This is not, despite the shininess of what I see.
Yeah. And
so some of those situations, great, like amazing reconnection, didn't even know that child was alive, or they just, were hoping they'd get educated and eventually come back. And so some really great situations. Some terrible. Yeah. Terrible.
And what do you do in those situations if it's terrible? Like because of abuse, or abuse, poverty or
neglect, poverty, addiction, you name it. So then you start working with that family to figure out, like, is there somebody else? Because obviously, clearly, just because we found you, the aunt first, doesn't mean you're the one. So then you start finding somebody else. And then you start working with those family members, because we found that some of those family members did want to change and wanted someone to help them move their life forward. Some of them did not. And so we did have a couple that we actually emergency, pulled those children back. All of this, all in line with the government and social worker, all, like, we weren't rogue on any of this. So we were involving local officials all along the way. So there was a couple where, like, this is terrible. Like, this is not the best place, and we have to bring this child back. So yeah, it's not all roses. The end of the day, when you look at this large chunk of children, better for most of them. But of course, not all.
But look, would you say on average, and this is something I think Brandon said, that yes, you have individual cases where the whatever family environment might not be as good as the orphanage, but if you take statistical average and generalities, it's
much better.
He said it's not dispute. It's like it's not debated. Like the data is extremely clear that growing up and aging out an orphanage is going to be worse than being raised in a family. Yeah.
And so, the data states that. And then from one who's did it on the ground, and, we've been with Cherish 13 years and have seen it play itself out. Completely agree with that statement.
So your goal was to basically not have any more orphans living full time.
No more kids living outside.
And did you reach that goal? I forget. Or are you almost there? Or
we actually, we are finished. We had 2 that just now aged out. And one is out living on his own, and they're both living on their own. But one of them is actually working for us and on our staff. But those are the final 2. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us about Cherish Uganda now. I was just, when you described what you guys do the other day, we were all just blown away at just how awesome this ministry sounds, at least from a distance, and we'll see it firsthand in a few months. So
yeah. So basically, we turn. Our mission used to be that we provide hope and a future for children living with HIV. Like, that's what we did. We were all about kids with HIV, giving them a hope and a future. And then we started to realize what we really were is we were a ministry that really focused on kids with HIV and caring for them, and hoping along the way we're going to do some discipleship. And so we've really flipped the model now. And now we are purposed to be a ministry that is all about spiritual formation and to change spiritual transformation. And we do that through medical care, education, and social work or family strengthening. So we've turned in what used to be an orphanage, kind of a closed system, is now a community center. We're now a resource center for the families that we have transition kids back into homes, but also the community with which we live. And so people come through our doors with a felt need of, they want to have a baby, or they got some medical condition, or they want their kid to be educated, or fill in the blank. And once they come through that door with that need, our staff starts investing in them well beyond that need, knowing that our number one goal is spiritual transformation. That's why we exist. So a complete flip. And not that the old way was like, what was those people thinking at the time? Like that's what we felt was like, this is the best thing. And then all of a sudden you just start to realize, wait, man, it's not. And rather than just dig our heels in and go, we don't really know what that looks like. And are people going to continue to give if we don't have kids on site? And hey, give, $49 a month to this, little Johnny boy kind of thing. I was like, no, we're going to risk those things and kind of move into a whole new space, because this is what we feel God's calling us to.
Yeah. So kids show up. It's almost like a school. Like during the day, it's filled with, okay. So you have tons of kids that are still there. They're just not staying there full time. Right. They go home to their families at night. And then you also have, you said, is there like a hospital or what kind of medical care do you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we have there's kind of three main arms: education, healthcare, and family strengthening. So with education, it's a school. We used to be a Ugandan school where we taught all the Ugandan curriculum. We're like every other school around. We endeavored to be the best we could be. So I think we were a higher quality than most of the schools around us, but we were still doing the same thing. When COVID came, Uganda shut down schools for 2 years, the longest of any country globally. And so what that did for us is it enabled us to kind of take a deep breath and go, is this what we want to continue doing? Is this? And we ended up shifting things completely. And now our school is basically a neurodevelopment center. And we focus a lot on processing, abstract thinking, skills training, and again, all under the umbrella of discipleship. And so, every day those kids come in, they roll in at 7:30 in the morning and they leave at like 3:30, 4 o'clock. And they love school. They love school because I'm getting fed there. I'm safe here. I'm loved and cared for here. Yeah. So it's great because it's just the sound of the school and the playground and kids, which is great. And then on site, we have a hospital, and that hospital is a 24-hour, 7 days a week hospital. What we do not have is an operating room. So that's, next phase, but we deliver babies and we do things that you wouldn't do in a normal kind of, urgent care kind of situation here in the States. But we again fit all within the guidelines of what Uganda lays out, but we handle tropical diseases and we handle accidents and burn victims and babies being born. We just started the maternity actually in December 1st. And we've already had over 40 babies born. And then we have 72 moms that are in our maternity program. Because again, we don't want you come in, you just deliver a baby and you're out. Like as soon as you find out you're pregnant, we want you connected because we want to build a relationship with you as a mom. So we're going to work all the way through the whole prenatal, the birth, antenatal, immunizations, the whole thing, and building all within the context that we want to build a relationship with this mom and ultimately this family. And so then our social work, our family strengthening department, they kind of work within both the hospital and the school, but they're the ones that are doing home visits. They're the ones that are doing trainings. We do lots of trainings, hygiene trainings, and medical does a lot of trainings, just random nutrition trainings and whatnot. We do personal finance trainings. We do trauma-based care, parenting. We just have a whole list of training. So our social work team is actively training people and teaching people, but at the same time, they're in all these homes and working with these families and sitting and watching life happen and just saying, we're here to partner with you in all of this.
Can you tell us how big of a problem is HIV? And I guess specifically in Uganda, like, is it a huge crisis? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And then also, how do kids get HIV? Is it basically if their mom has the HIV, then they're just born with it, or?
Yeah. So HIV, it continues to be a problem. Where it's not a problem, well, it's always a problem, but we can control it we can control those viral loads really well with good medication. And they're called ARVs, antiretroviral drugs. Those ARVs we get through a grant from the U.S. government. The U.S. government gives about $450 million a year to Uganda for HIV and AIDS care. So we get a piece of that slice. And so we're able to free test kits and free medication. And so if you're on the medications, which you have to take twice a day, so our clients all take 7 in the morning, 7 at night. And sometimes it's like a handful of pills, but twice a day for the rest of your life. And you have good nutrition, good water, intake, just taking care of yourself, you will live a good full life. And when you come to Cherish, like the school is full of kids with HIV, but you're going to go, where's the sick ones? I don't even see them because it's well under control. So it is a problem in the country if people don't have access to the drugs. And it's also a problem because of the stigma. And so there are people who have access to the drugs but won't take the drugs because they know if somebody sees me taking medication twice a day, they're going to know I have HIV, and then they're not going to be near me, and then the social stigma kicks in. So there are people who have access to the drugs but just won't take them. And in that culture, especially in the village culture where we are, you'll have a small room, that one room house where there's 6, 8, maybe 10 people living in there. So there's not like these private places you can keep your meds and private places you can take your medication. So it makes it difficult. And then in a situation like ours, which is a fishing community, it's even more prevalent because you have these men that fish all night, and then during the day, they got nothing to do. And you have a lot of women with a lot of children that are desperate to feed their kids. And for a couple dollars, they'll have their little moment, and that mom gets her couple bucks. And so she's feeding her kids. But obviously in settings like that, HIV just runs rampant. So the prevalency rate in Uganda is around 6% as a whole. But in places like these fishing communities, like where we are, you'll get prevalency rates 60, 70%, sometimes higher.
Oh gosh. Wow.
Because of lack of access of drugs and because of just the prevalence of just sexual contact everywhere.
Okay. And so
as far as kids, as far as kids, there's a couple different ways. Obviously, you can contract it. The main way in Uganda, the main way of transmission through HIV is through mother to child during birth. And what's crazy is that mom is in the womb, or that baby's in the womb of that mom, and you're thinking all the blood's got to be all flow. It's not. That baby does not have HIV. The HIV is contracted as the baby goes through the birth canal. So if you give birth in a clinic that understands that and takes care of everything that needs to be done prenatal and during delivery, that baby has a really high chance of being born HIV negative, which is why we now do births in our hospital, because we can stop that. And then the second way it's transmitted is through sexual contact. And so with the kids that we deal with and the kids that have HIV, it's not from some consensual sexual relationship. It's because they were abused by someone with HIV. And sexual child abuse just runs rampant in that country. And it's almost normalized. Like we had a situation where one of our students, our girls, because our teachers know you're not here just to teach, like you're here to build relationships. And one of our students had shared with the teacher that her uncle was raping her. They use the word defile. My uncle's defiling me all the time. Gosh. So our social work team, then, they don't just show up and knock on the door, but they start, they know the family. They figure out when the uncle's not going to be there because the uncle lives with them, because many people live in the same house. They show up to the mom and sit down with her. And the mom's like, I know, but what am I going to do? Oh. It's my husband's brother. If I say something, then my husband is going to get mad. And then me and the kids might end up out of this house and homeless. And then what? So it's not these simple, like just call the police and this is handled. And so we're constantly working through those kinds of situations with our students and our community all the time. So yeah, HIV in America, it's, go ahead. How do you address that?
Yeah, if that's such a common situation, what do you do? That's got to be horrifying.
Yeah, in that situation, we start figuring out, okay, how do we keep your daughter safe? Like, let's figure something out. Like, maybe she's got to start sleeping in your bed every single night. Like, let's figure out this situation. Now, let's work with you and figure out how are we going to protect you, but we're going to stop this uncle from doing this kind of behavior. And then that's many conversations, and it is involving trusted police. Eventually, we got that guy arrested. He was arrested. Okay. He's in jail now
because it is illegal. Like, if
it's
you
illegal.
Tell the authorities, they're not going to say, well, what did we, but they're like, no, we need to stop that. Like, that's not right.
But, okay. The problem is money talks a lot in that country. And so we have had a lot of problems with influential people in the community basically paying off or getting out of the steering away from the accountability that they should be held to. So it's not quite as cut and dry as that. We now, after many years of being there, we have a really good relationship with local government as well as national government. But those things are a little easier now than they were at the beginning, just because of the relationships we've built. But it's still hard. It's not. No situation is clear cut and easy. And like, we do this, and this is taken care of.
Yeah,
it's just not, unfortunately.
Golly.
Yeah.
What? So you're back. So when I looked on your website, Cherish Uganda, I mean, all the leaders that are running the place they look Ugandan, or at least African.
They are.
You are no longer there you're full time with Cherish, but you're not living there. Right. Like, right. I would imagine that was intentional. Like, you didn't want to be the white Westerner that just is the CEO forever there and always kind of running the place. Can you talk to us about just some of your big picture kind of maybe shifts in your philosophy of ministry? What does it mean to be a Westerner, living in Africa, doing ministry in Africa, and what are some changes in your philosophy of ministry that happened over your time there?
Yeah, so the original team had always had this vision that we run by locals eventually, which was great. So there was 9 people who moved from the UK to establish Cherish, bought the land, bought 21 acres, and started building buildings and started rolling. By the time we showed up 3 years in, there was only 2. So 7 had already transitioned, some in other ministries into the country of Uganda, and then some back to the UK. And so then eventually, after a couple of years, those 2 left and went back to the UK, and it was just our family. Okay. And we also knew from when we showed up, we're not going to live here forever. Like, we had the dream that we're going to be in this ministry forever, but we knew that at some point, this has to be local led, whatever that looks like. We might move offsite. We didn't really know what it looked like, but we knew that we can't sit here as the CEO and we run this place and our little minions do their job. So, there was a young man by the name of Sam. He was the first teacher we ever hired. And, as in leadership, you're always looking like, who's the next leader I'm betting on, and so you're constantly doing that always. And Sam, we just knew that there's something about that kid. So we ended up taking him out of that teacher role. He became my assistant, and just for multiple years, just my shadow and doing life with him. He was single at the time. And just working through even like it was just intense discipleship with him. Of course, there was leadership training and ministry stuff, but so once we had lived there it was at the 6-year mark where we really felt like, okay, it's time. It's time for this leadership team to step into this spot, and it's time for us to step out. And one of the reasons that brought us back to the States was we were at the point where the board, we basically realized if we're going to grow, we have to be somewhere where we raise money. Like, you can't push this thing forward, building buildings and doing, putting infrastructure up to make this thing happen if we're there. So that we lived in Africa, and we'd fly back about every year and a half or so to the States. And now we've kind of flipped that. And now we are living in Austin, but we go back every quarter. So every 3-4 months we're back, and we don't do, so we don't do any ministry like my wife and I, we don't ever go on home visits. We don't ever go out and do ministry in the community. Now, we live life in the community. Like we'll go buy chapatis and sodas and, live life in there. But as far as ministry things, we don't. Everything we do is all on site. And for us, it's all based on staff development. So if you take a look at our schedule when we're there, it's just pouring into staff, pouring into staff, pouring into staff. The one thing.
Why don't you do? Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. I know the question you're going to ask. Yeah. When the white guy shows up, there's just this instant. What do you have for me? What do you have? The continent of Africa has had billions and billions of dollars of aid dumped into it. Billions. Mm-hmm. And there's some neat things you see. You're like, wow, that's really cool, and that's really cool. But then you also like, it's not billions and billions and billions of dollars cool. Like, where did all that money go? And there's just so much money that goes into that country and just it like evaporates. I don't know what happens to it, but there's just a lot of shady things that happen. There's just a lot of, and it is just, frankly, a lot of it's just wasted. And so we have found that when we start showing up, it just changes the dynamic of everything. And people start wanting things. And then all of a sudden this relationship is now based on what I can get. And so then you feel like if I'm actually going to minister to this person, I better give this thing to keep them coming into what we're doing, or they're not going to ever spiritually transform. And so you then turn into this kind of transactional relationship. And so we just realized we're making life difficult when we show up at a home visit with our social worker and we sit down with the kid and mom, like a true conversation is not happening there.
Really?
It's all skewed because I'm there. Huh. So like when you guys come, like as much as you're going to want to go on a home visit, like you're not gonna, you're going to go out in the community and you get to see and be a part of the community, but you won't go on a home visit because it'll just your white skin messes it up. It just messes it up. So we just realized that our focus has to be staff development, staff training. And as we invest in our team, then that investment starts to flow out into what they're doing with our community. And so the only thing that we do that isn't direct, not the only thing, the main thing that we do that isn't directly to our staff is I do pastoral training with all the local pastors. So local pastors will come and I'll do it's just, it's just random stuff, like whatever they're working on or whatever they're worried about, or we do a lot of stuff as we're training our staff, and then they kind of often will kind of push back against it just because it's so culturally different. So then I often then do training on that when I show up. All right, let's talk about what our staff have been talking about to you, and let's kind of work through this. And so it's been a great thing. At first it was antagonistic, as they really felt threatened. And so, and I wasn't doing any training with them. I was just training our staff. But then once we started building relationships, and then we started having that pastoral training in our living room once a month, then that started to build this relationship. And now we have a great relationship with all these local pastors. And so and people are always saying, why doesn't church just start a church? Why don't you we're not going to start a church. Like, again, the white guy shows up like, hey, like everybody will come because they're going to, what are we going to get if we go to the white guy's church? So we are there to support the ministry that's already happening. So whether it's medical or education, so family strengthening, pastoral training, we have a lot of soccer played on our facility. We do a lot of sports stuff. Like there's just so many opportunities, and we just our goal, my wife and I, we just pour into staff. That's really the shift that we've made.
That it makes sense. And I've been to Africa, twice now, but in other countries where it's very similar, where your whiteness, your Westernness is, it can be, it just creates a weird dynamic. Just like what you said, or even like and this is something I learned recently, like, if you go into a village, a community or whatever, and even if you're like hanging out with a pastor, you're preaching at a church, you're just out there doing quote unquote ministry, the person you're doing it with, when you leave, now people look to him like, oh, you have a Western connection. So what do you have for me? And it's like, it creates this weird power dynamic, right?
It does.
I mean, that could be really discouraging, right? For people that
for sure
want to go and help and do ministry. It's like,
yeah, it's hard.
And is that pretty universal across Africa from what you know? I mean, I know your experience in Uganda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. From what
so what are some big picture do's and don'ts? Or oh, go ahead.
So like I just got a WhatsApp message from a guy, like literally 10 minutes before I hopped on. And he starts off with, "Praise God, Pastor Brent." And then he talks about, "I'm an evangelist and I do this thing. My ministry is this name. And I invite you into partnership of this great vision that I have. So will you please contact me?" Like that happens all the time, because there is this kind of general, and the truth is I have so much more money than they have, so much more. Like it's crazy when you look at the wealth disparity. It's massive.
Yeah.
And so I think that their general view is even the basics of, okay, you fly over here 3 or 4 times a year. Like I had a staff member ask, how much does that cost? Like nobody has asked that question. Yeah, no. I mean, our leadership team have asked that question because we actually fly them a couple of times, at least once a year. We'll fly a leadership person out here. But this is a maintenance guy, and he asked the question, and I told him, and he was just, we're sitting around a table with like 6 other maintenance guys, and they were just like, whoa, like blown away. And so that next day, he was working on a row to the shovel, and I just grabbed an extra shovel and started working with him. And his name is Dowdy. I said, "Dowdy, I got a question for you." I said, "You heard that amount of that plane ticket, like that cost a lot of money. Do you think it'd be better that Leah and I don't come and we just send the money and we use it for ministry here rather than spending that kind of money?" And this kid, he stops and he says, "I need to think about this answer." And he sits and leans on his shovel. And it was probably 2 or 3 minutes of silence, which seems like an eternity when you ask somebody a question. And he looks at me and he says, "You know what? You need to keep coming, because if you don't, it's just like a mom or dad who send money and never show up to have a relationship. So as much as it costs, we need to keep spending that money." Yeah. And that kid got it. Like he understood. But so there's just it's. I understand if I was living in Uganda and some white guy kept flying 3-4 times a year, and I watched these buildings pop up and this infrastructure start to be built at this place, and I knew that he's the connection for that. So even if he doesn't have a lot of money, he must know a lot of people who have a lot of money. So why not ask? And so we get asked all the time. That's kind of the way the culture is.
I've had the same experience with some ministry partners we're involved with in it's another majority world country, and same thing. I'm like, hey, we're gonna bring a team. We have 5 people coming over. That's a lot of money just on flights, let alone what it costs to just your driver and food and lodging and everything. Like if we just would you rather just said it's cut you a check for like $20,000? But they said the same. The relationship is more, as long as it's a relationship, not just come paint a fence, leave, never see each other again. It's like, okay, if you're just going to come be labor, send us to $20,000. We can hire, we can hire locals to
much cheaper.
We can hire, a bunch of people to build like an apartment complex for that much money, But if there's a relationship, that relationship is you can't put a price on it. So so going back to just ministry specifically, let's just say specifically in Africa, let's just say Uganda, since that's what you can speak directly to, but I'm sure this will apply to just Africa as a whole on some level. What are some big picture do's and don'ts then? So people listening, they want to go on a short-term trip, they want to go on a long-term trip, they're sending money to a missionary, whatever, they're somehow involved or want to be involved in Africa. What are some big picture do's and don'ts as somebody who has white skin from the West?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're sending money, you just need to know what that money's going towards. Like, do your due diligence and find out what is the purpose of this ministry, and what are you spending your money? Ask them their budget. Like, don't be afraid to ask those questions. We feel like, oh, I can't ask those kind of questions. Yeah, you can. Legally, as a nonprofit, the books are open. Like there's a lot of information that you can ask for a nonprofit. So don't be afraid to ask questions to figure out where's this really going. And that, I mean, there's big organizations. You got the World Vision's Campus Crusades doing massive, amazing work. Like the scope of the work is amazing. You also with those, you have to be comfortable that you're not going to know the people who are on the ground doing the work. And if you're comfortable with that and you're comfortable with what they lay out, then great. Then that's what you should do. But if you're giving to a smaller organization like ours, like our budget's under $1 million. And if you're working with a smaller organization like ours, you should be able to talk to the guy who's running the thing. Like you should have access to, hey, tell me, what are some of the dreams you have? Like how can I be praying, and get on some regular communication with that ministry? Because and from our end, that we prefer that. I mean, I love this. I mean, if someone wants to write me a check and go, here, use this for ministry, I'll take it. But I would prefer that you write me a check and we start to engage in relationship about what it is we're doing. Not just your bank account for us. Like we really do desire the relationship. And I say, if you can go. There's nothing like putting your eyes on the work. Nothing like it. Now,
so talk to us about short term then, like because I would say the majority of people listening, that's probably more what they're going to do. So
right,
short term do's and don'ts.
Yeah. So for us, it is all about relationship. We put you to work, but you are working right alongside with our people doing what they would normally be doing if you weren't there. And so, I think, yes, show up, pick up a shovel, sit with kids, do math homework, like get involved in it while you're there so you can actually see what you're doing. But I mean, so many people have said to us so many times, if I could just come and sit and hold those sweet babies and pray for them for a week, that would be amazing. Yeah. And like, no, because you're already assuming that we don't do that. You're assuming we don't pray for these babies. And then when you come with your agenda, let me tell you what I'm going to give you, without even asking the question, do you do this or do you not? And then when you show up at a short-term trip, like, again, you're coming to partner. So you need to find out, how can I help? Not how can I do what I want to do when I show up? And every ministry is going to be different. Like for us, what we need for you to do is be in relationship with our people. I can tell a security guard, man, thanks for this. This is amazing. Thanks for the work you're doing. I tell them that all the time. When you tell them that, it means the world. It's like when you talk to your kids and you say things and all of a sudden they come to you at the dinner table and say, I heard this thing from so-and-so. You're like, wait a minute, I've been telling you that forever. So there's just something about an additional voice that is speaking truth and speaking life over people that is amazing. And then I would also say, when you show up on a trip, be wary of a team that stops the work, of a ministry that stops work, and then they just perform for you for a week and show you, it's more of a production. Because you don't need that. Like, what you need to see is what actually happens here. And that ministry doesn't need that. Because if we did that, then you're going to leave, and now we're a week behind in work because we just entertained you for a week. So when you show up, just fall right in. One of the things we do that we learned early on is we don't do any photos for the first part of the week. So you can't even bring a camera onto Cherish until Thursday, because this little device just becomes a distraction, as we know, and it's a distraction there as well. And we want relationship. We don't want you to be so concerned about you capturing the moment. We want you to actually be in the moment, and then we'll give you a couple days on the end to now take some photos. But now it's based on a foundation of relationship. You've ate with our people, and you've worked with our people, and you've laughed with our people, and you've heard stories, and you've shared stories. And now it's not just this is going to be so great on my real kind of situation. It's like, no, right. Like talk about be real, like right now, like phone back at the hotel. Like, this is what this is going to look like. So we just relationship.
What are some well-intended things that short-term trips, maybe not with because I mean, you have like really strict kind of like, here's what you're going to do. You're not going to do this, right. Or whatever. Right. For maybe other ministries that don't have those kind of in place, like what are some things that you've seen short-term trips do that again, well intended, but might actually produce more long term harm.
Yeah, well, everything that we have in place for teams is because we learned the hard way. It wasn't like before teams we came up with this great plan. It was like we started having teams and went, well, that's not good and that's not good. Like one of the things we will tell our teams is do not give anybody anything. Because what happens is you start meeting this kid and you find out this kid, his, so we have a skills-based learning where our kids are learning skills. We have a computer lab. And so you might find out one of these guys, he's learned graphic design, but he doesn't have a computer. And you think, well, I have a computer. In fact, I have a computer back at the hotel that's kind of, well, what if I just leave it with him? And then you now bring it the next day, and then you give it to him. Well, now you have now further cemented the whole white man will give me things. And now all of a sudden, every other staff member has now seen that kid get a computer. And they're like, okay, now when I'm working with people, how do I now make sure my story starts tugging on some heartstrings and I can get some stuff as well? So like, we don't give anybody anything. Now, if you feel like the Spirit of God tells you to give that computer to that kid, then we have you come to us. And now let's figure this out. And oftentimes what we'll do is we'll have you leave it. And it might be a month. All of a sudden that computer is now available. And we sit down and say, hey, this computer, God has blessed us with this computer. And we feel like you are the right one to do it. So it's not some stranger that showed up. It's us. It just that we have been resourcing people for ministry and for life for years and years and years. So it doesn't change anything. Now, what you miss out on is you don't get to hand them the computer and have the kid go, this is amazing. Like you will miss out.
That's more for me than them. I mean, that's like,
right. For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a big one. And then the photo thing is a big one. Like it's crazy just how lost we get into our phones. And even more so on a trip because people just want to capture it. You're having an amazing time and you want to capture the moment. So of course, capture the moment is great, but it comes at a large expense. And so we don't do that. We also found that teams can stay too long. So we have you stay for a week. That's it. Cause after a week, it becomes more of a burden for us to keep that rolling. And it just starts to feel like the family that just stayed too long. Like, man, that family, when they came, it was great, but they stayed a bit too long and we wish they would have left earlier. That's kind of what it happens where we want everybody to leave when they're feeling like this is amazing. I want more. I want more. Everybody leave and want more. And then always people come and not without fail, most of the time there's someone on the team who wants to move there and live there. Oh, this is great. They just do. And they start having those conversations. And I would say, don't have those conversations. If you feel like God wants that from you, go home, pray about that, get yourself out of the situation, then contact somebody and then see where that goes. But in the moment, and I get it. Well-intentioned, emotions get crazy. And then another thing teams can tend to do is promise a lot of things. I had a missionary tell us early on, like, just know you're going to be promised so many things by so many well-intended people. And you will be disappointed if you believe that all those will happen. Because people get excited. They show up and they get excited. And we can do this and we can do this and we can do this. And they speak it as if it's already happened. And then many people will then go back and get back into their normal life. And it just kind of goes away. And well-intended, again, but I would say again, if there's something like that that's brewing in you, go home, pray about it, then reach back out to that ministry and say, hey, when I was there, I felt like God impressed upon me this. Can we have a conversation about it? Because I mean, we lived without for years, and I can't tell you how many hundreds, maybe more, of unkept promises. Not because they're bad people. We just get caught up. We just get caught up in the emotion, and we kind of get focused on what's here. Then we get back home, and it's just, I can't really do that, and I feel bad to actually say something, and then it kind of turns into what we wish it wouldn't.
I need to remind my team of that because I don't know if we talked about that the other night. But that's good because it happens every time. I mean, I've been on enough, trips and stuff where I know like you get that high, and then you come back and you're angry at the American church because like.
Sure.
In Nepal, there's so much more on fire, and they don't have any money, and look at all this stuff. And then you get discouraged, and then it levels out, and then you're back at Target buying your whatever, your $5 latte.
Yeah,
Sorry,
for sure.
So,
Yeah.
and that's just, you can either live in perpetual guilt, or you can move overseas full time, or you just kind of understand that like there's cross-cultural experiences are awesome and complex and are super helpful if you have the right mindset. What about, I've always wondered this about, what about like short-term teaching teams? Go over for 2 weeks, do pastoral training seminars, teach the book of Romans to a bunch of pastors or something like that. Is that good and helpful? What are some possible unforeseen dangers or something like that?
I think they're very helpful. Any kind of training, like when doctors come and train our medical staff, when teachers come and train our education staff, like that specific focus training is great. As long as they're understanding we are here to train. We're here to give whatever knowledge we have and pass it on. And just understand that cultures are so different that there'll be times when people will look at you like, what are you talking about? Because it's just way too different, way too different. Yeah. I mean, as a pastor, I showed up and realized my teaching style can't be the same. Like it just can't. I was using illustrations that didn't make sense. And like, it was just totally different, but that took some time. That took some time to figure that out. So it can be very, very helpful for sure. As long as people are really focused and understand that this is why I'm here.
And would you say as long as there's not this expectation that, this teacher comes and trains and then he leaves us a bunch of money,
right? Leaves us something, right?
Have you seen that happen? Where
for sure,
there's kind of
that happens.
Motives,
for sure. And so anytime that we have those kinds of things, we always communicate that to our staff, and they know that. Just because someone shows doesn't mean they're leaving anything. Just so you know. And I think it's real important that whoever comes doesn't like so many times we look at. You will see problems all around you in Uganda, and you go, man, if someone just did this and did this and did this, it'd be easy fix. Like we look at these we think easy fixes. And the truth is, if it was an easy fix, somebody would have already done it. There's obviously deeper levels involved in that. So I think even as you come as a training as a pastor, like there's some things you'll hear and you'll be like, wait, your church does what? You should just do this, this, and this, and this, and it'll solve that. And the truth is it won't. Like it takes relationship. I've been working with these pastors for 13 years, and there's still some stuff that just gets me so frustrated. It's like, what is happening?
This is so inefficient.
Yeah. What are we doing?
Did you read the Poisonwood Bible? Have you read that book?
No, I haven't.
It's been years since I didn't finish it. But it was kind of that like Western missionary. It's a novel, I think, but I think it's based on a true story. But about a missionary comes over and he sees kind of all the things they're doing wrong, even like gardening. He's like, well, I can grow crops way better back home, and and doesn't realize the soil's different, the bees are different, the irrigation is different, and he can't the stuff that he could grow amazingly back home. He's like, nothing grows here, even though it does. Right. It's just you're not like learning. You come over thinking I could do it better than them. Look at their crops; they're all falling apart. And I hope I represented that. It's been like 20 years since I read it. But, yeah, that's it. Yeah. So what about that? Like you come over as a teacher, and could there be this like power dynamic that's this assumption like, oh, these poor people, they're poor and they don't know anything. And I know all this stuff. Sure. I went to seminary and I'm going to come over and teach them. Yeah.
And it's interesting that like, and it's like this all around the world. Like our people see through that stuff, that they can definitely sit there and go, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Like they know,
but they won't say anything, right?
No, no, they will. Thank you so much. It's amazing. Thank you for what you came. Yeah, thank you. In fact, there has been, and I have experienced this, where a guy was up teaching. The translator was telling everybody, "Don't listen to this guy. He does not know what he's talking about." And the pastor's just up there preaching and like telling everybody how to do things, and everyone just like nodding and smiling. Yeah. So they can see through it. So it's that same idea. Just come as a student. This is what I have to give. I don't know if it'll make sense even in this culture, but this is what I have to lay out.
One of my first short-term trips I went on, I think it was my third trip. I was halfway through seminary, so I was 26 years old, maybe. 25 years old, just gotten married, and I went to Russia outside of Moscow and did like a 2-week teaching with a bunch of pastors. And these are like Baptist pastors. So that, they're, it was pretty or it has a history of persecution. Like a lot of these guys were in prison, persecuted for their faith, or they got saved in prison. They're tatted up. I mean, these guys are hardcore, like doing ministry in some really tough situations. And here I show up in my, suit and tie from, John MacArthur Seminary. I taught them the book of Romans, and they were, they were thankful. It was great. Like they actually did like the knowledge piece, but I remember a couple years later thinking back, I'm like, why was I teaching these guys? These guys are like saints, and like I'm sitting there teaching them. They're like 48 years old, and golly, it was so fun. What was funny in that culture is and these guys are just on fire for the Lord, but like cheating in that culture wasn't a big deal. Like that's just not. It's kind of like how comfort in America is just not like, oh yeah, just it's just not a big deal, or greed or gluttony or other things. Or in other countries they would look and like, what are you doing? Like and so I'm giving an exam. Here's all these hardcore pastors. Just cheating off each other. Like, I'm like freaking out. Like, what are you doing? Like, no, it's fine. It's not like, it's not fine. You're sitting there cheating on the test. But even that, like, I was like, I come at it with my moral grid and, and not realizing that culturally there's just a different kind of emphasis, whatever. But anyway, it's fun. You learn over the years.
For sure. Yeah. Whenever we bring staff members here, they're always amazed, because there's stuff like, I look around your neighborhood. Where is everybody? They're all in their houses. Doing what? Like probably watching television or scrolling through their phone, and for them, the neighborhood looks abandoned, totally abandoned. And they just can't get around. Like, wait, like, how does this work? Where their culture is together all the time, this big communal kind of thing, outside eating, cooking, all outside. So it's just those kind of shifts that, we think it's no big deal. Of course, I come in, I park my car in the garage, and I go in the house. I'm not supposed to engage with those people out there. Like, there's so much of that kind of stuff that you show up for a week, you just miss it.
Yeah. I love that. Like I've been to Nepal several times and in Africa a few times or even like Middle Eastern culture. Basically, most places outside the West, it just seems like there's just so much more of a buzz. You go around the city, you go around neighborhoods, and it's just it's buzzing with people.
Life happens outside. You sleep indoors. That's the only thing you do indoors. Everything happens outside. Yeah, and we totally miss that. Every time we go back, every time we're like, why do we live in Austin, Texas? Like every time. Because we love that. We love that.
Tell us how can people find you and your ministry, and is there something? I mean, if people want to donate, is that something that you need or want, or how can people help Cherish Uganda?
Yeah, for sure. Needs? Yeah, if you go to cherishuganda.org, you'll find. You can check out our website, and there's places to give there. As most ministries, our vision always outpaces the resource. So there's always more to be done. We can talk about each one of those things: education, healthcare, family strengthening, pastoral training. You pick one. We got dreams pushing forward on all of them. So we'd love for people to be involved. We don't do a lot of teams. We do, I think this year we're just doing 3. We try to keep that kind of small, but if somebody wants to go on a trip, let's talk about it for sure. If you get the first one booked in for next year, then you're in. Like we'd love to have people come. A team is anywhere from 3 to 12 for us. More than it has to be at least 3 and no more than 12 people.
Okay.
But those are a great way. Yeah. And then if you want to sign up for a newsletter, you'll just get stuff rolling in your inbox. It just kind of keeps you updated on what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Brent, for this time together and for your ministry. I can't wait to see you in a few months in June, and I'll get to see it firsthand.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.